Well, hello everybody. It's nice to see you. It's always nice to hear the voices, even if I can't see the faces. So, Lisa and I miss you all, and I need Richard to call the new branch we're going to and tell them how we're supposed to do a variety of things. They have their own little way of doing things, and I need the Coles to clean them up and make them where I'm a little more comfortable with them. So. All right, I got to say, I struggled with this. I really don't, I know that the church says it's practice faithful stewardship, but I don't think that's exactly what it is. And I really did. I looked up lots of references. This parable is not like many parables. It was a real challenge for me anyway. So I'm going to share it with you, and I figured out at least my angle on it and why I think it's so important and why it's included in our worship service today. So I'm going to start. I don't have another section for reading, so I'm going to read some of this to you. It says here that in Luke, Jesus told his disciples, so here's the story. It's a parable. There was a rich man whose manager was accused of wasting his possessions. So we called him in and he asked him, he says, what is this I hear about you? Give an account of your management, because you can't be my manager any longer. You're fired. I'm adding some words into this. I'm sure they were there. They just didn't get put in print. The manager said to himself, geez, he said, what shall I do now? My master's taken away my job. I'm going to get fired. I'm not strong enough to dig, and I'm ashamed to beg. I know what I'll do. When I lose my job here, people will welcome me into their houses. So he had this great idea. And one of the things to think about, so back then, the way priests and other people like this manager made their income is they worked for a master, and the master needed, let's say, 100 bales of whatever. He would tack on another 20 or 30 so that when he got paid what the master wanted, and plus he had his own income source, which is why the tax collectors were so hated by everybody, because they would add on to what they actually already owed and didn't want to pay this additional amount. So basically what you do is you overcharge. People still do that today. They'll say, I get wholesale and charge you retail, and you never really know. They just tack on the price. So what this manager did is he called in each one of the debtors that owed the master some money, and he asked the first, he said, well, how much do you owe? And he said, well, I owe 900 gallons of olive oil. And the manager told him, take your bill, sit down quickly, and make it 450. And then he asked the second, and how much do you owe? And he said, I owe 1,000 bushels of wheat. He said, don't worry about it. He told him, take your bill and make it 800. So when the master found out what happened, he commended the dishonest manager because he had acted shrewdly, he said. For the people of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own kind than are the people of the light. I tell you, use worldly wealth. This is Jesus speaking. I tell you, use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourselves, so that when it is gone, you'll be welcomed into eternal dwellings. So if you've not been trustworthy in handling worldly wealth, who will trust you with true riches? And if you've not been trustworthy with someone else's property, who will give you property of your own? And then this is the real kicker, and the one that most of us have heard from this parable. No one can serve two masters. And I think this is the focus of this. Either you're going to hate the one and love the other, or you'll be devoted to the one and despise the other. But you can't serve both God and money. So, if friendships are based on this reciprocal kind of egalitarian relationship, they're releasing other people's debts not only enriches them, but it also establishes a new kind of reciprocity between them. So the Filipinos actually have a name for that. They call it utang na loob. I probably mispronounced it, but it literally means inner debt, or a debt of the inner gratitude that you have for the favor that this person did to you, and you feel compelled to then help them. So that's kind of what the master was saying. That's not so bad, that's shrewd, and you not only helped yourself, but you helped others. But the capstone to all this is no slave can serve two masters. You can't serve God and wealth. And this is a reiterated central theme in Luke all the way through. The kingdom of God entails a giving up all other commitments, including the commitment to economic security. And it's noted, Luke places a lot of emphasis on how the reign of God reverses the status of the rich and poor. So the people that are rich are going to be poor and vice versa. So why is our dishonest manager so shrewd? Why is that a good thing? And even though he is still a sinner, this is from the Bible, who is still looking out for his own interests, he models behavior the disciples can emulate. Instead of simply being a victim of circumstance, he transformed a bad situation into one that benefited him and other people. So by reducing other people's debts, he creates a new set of relationships based not on the vertical relationship between lenders and debtors, but on something more like reciprocal or egalitarian relationships of friends. So you did a favor for me, and I feel compelled, if you think of the Filipino saying, I feel some compelled to be nice to you at some point. And as usual, these parables that Jesus tells really are not necessarily, they didn't really happen the way they're said they do, but they're metaphors. They're not literal. And in this story, it's a metaphor. So the master in this story is God. And the dishonest manager is the Pharisees. There was a lot of belief, certainly by Jesus, that the Pharisees cared more about their money than they did loving God and loving others. And so took advantage of others more than he believed they should have. And he was much more inclined towards social justice. And so the Pharisees were kind of the target of this parable. And the debtors were the people, the poor. And this, the point was that the Pharisees were just too fond of money and neither loved God or others, which of course are the two greatest commandments. So even the Buddhists, kind of have an idea about this. In the Four Noble Truths, the first truth is that suffering is a part of life. And then the second truth is that attachment is the cause of the suffering. So the Buddhists would say it's okay to have money, it's okay to have wealth and things, as long as you're not so attached to that you couldn't let it go easily. That the sin is the false attachment to something other than God, not the money in and of itself. So Buddhists are fine with possessions and wealth as long as they don't possess us. And I think that's kind of what is being said here in this lesson, is that's a really hard thing to do. If you've got a lot of money, it's really hard not to spend a lot of time worshiping that, working on that instead of working for God. So this parable is not only the place in the Bible where there is an attack on ruling elites, people who are making more money than they should and taking advantage of the poor, but also for caring more for their wealth than for God. So the parable is really kind of an attack on the Pharisees. But this isn't the only place in the Bible where you'll see that people who believe in God believe that the elites in power are taking advantage of the poor, and that's a sin and that we need to do something about it. And there's nowhere where that's more done, it seems to me, and I probably could be corrected, but Amos. There's a story, it contains one of the Bible's most vivid encounters between the ruling elites of the ancient world and the word of the Lord. Now, Amos, as with Jesus, had serious rivals with the ruling elite of their time. And he was the kind of guy with Amos, he seemed to be kind of call it what it is. So the encounter with Amos begins with Amaziah, the priest of Bethel. So he's one of the two major temples in the northern kingdom. So, right, we got Israel and Judah. And he was sending a message to King Jeroboam, and I probably mispronounced that, charging Amos with conspiracy against the king and the kingdom, including threatening the king with death. Because Amos really was not a man to mix words. He told it as he saw it. So he and Amaziah, this priest, were really going at it. So then it says, Amaziah, the priest of Bethel, sent the king, Jeroboam of Israel, saying, Amos has conspired against you in the very center of the house of Israel. The land is not able to bear all his words. So Amos had, according to him, he said, Amos had said, Jeroboam shall die by the sword, and Israel will go into exile away from his land. And then Amaziah threatened Amos and ordered him to leave the northern kingdom. He didn't want him around anymore. And Amaziah said to Amos, O seer, which is a slanderous term, go flee away to the land of Judah, earn your bread there, and prophesy there. But never again prophesy at Bethel, for it is the king's sanctuary, and it's a temple of the kingdom. And Amos didn't like this very much, because he's still interested in more social justice that he didn't think was happening. So Amos defiantly responds with a further indictment, perhaps against Amaziah, we don't really know, but it could equally have been to the king. Amaziah had sent a message to the king about Amos. And what follows is Amos's response back, we think, to the king. Now, we don't know that for sure, but we think. Now, here's what Amos said. Imagine this, if you got somebody upset with you, if you got Amos upset with you, what might happen? But here, Amos was not happy that they disinvited him to speak. So he then writes to the king, we think. And he says, now, therefore, hear the word of the Lord. You say, do not prophesy against Israel, and do not preach against the house of Isaac. Therefore, thus says the Lord, your wife, the queen, he didn't say the queen, but I put it in there, shall become a prostitute in the city, and your sons and your daughters, they're going to fall by the sword, and your land shall be parceled out by line. You yourself shall die in an unclean land, and Israel shall surely go into exile away from its land. What that tells me is, do not make Amos or any of his descendants upset with you. He was not kidding. And obviously the chances of him, if you said something like this to the king, I mean, he's just a priest. Imagine the courage it took for him to say those words. He felt so strongly about the ruling elites of the domination system and how unfairly they were treating people. And Amos is not a solitary figure in the Bible. We see the same courage in its other major figures like Moses, the prophets in general, Jesus and Paul. Their courage came from a conviction somehow that to participate in God's passion for a different kind of world here and now. And the transformation of the domination system of the world into a world that's fair and where no one shall be afraid and everyone gets enough. So what do you think Amos's, the way Amos talked to the king, what if we had Amos, what would Amos say about American Christianity? So when we hear in Amos and the other major biblical voices, they challenge a lot that's in American politics and even American Christianity, I think. The United States has the greatest income inequality in the developed world. Nobody has more income inequality than we do. And it's been growing for about 30 years. The increasing income inequality in the product of the political ideology of individualism is at the seat of it. And the idea of individualism, and most of us like this, pick yourself up, do something, make yourself successful. That is kind of an American story, but it's taken too far. So individualism is the philosophy that, every person should take care of themselves. And if you fail to take care of yourself, well, you're an individual, it's up to you. So individualism emphasizes what used to be called the self-made man. And in the 40s and 50s, probably none of you here remember this, but a real popular phrase was the common man. And that was just post-World War II. So we've been here before. The idea of the self-made man is not true. And so that idea that that's what happens, the data just don't support it. So this approach, the self-made man approach, favors really the gifted, whether you're gifted by genetic inheritance, good health, intelligence, family issues that emphasize families that you're raised in, that emphasize education and hard work. the economic class into which you were born really matters. Did you inherit wealth and so forth? So that it really favors the gifted. It has a cruel corollary too. In our lives, it is largely our own fault is the opposite corollary, right? If we failed. So if we've not achieved, it's on us. We're the failures. And many Americans embrace this ideology of individualism. And I think you can somewhat, but it doesn't work if it's applied across society. Studies have indicated that, we're the most individualistic country in the world. That's a strong, story in America. And as an ideology, individualism is also, it's kind of the foundation of the conservative politics and economics of our country. It shapes the voting of about 80% of conservative Protestants, that philosophy. Their political passion is primarily about the behavior of individuals, right? Especially issues the church and popular conservative thought tends to favor and be more interested in things related to sexuality. But income equality, economic justice, and a strong commitment to peace are not often priorities for many Christian churches. According to a poll conducted in 2013, it's dated, but it's the closest one I could get, a majority of white Christians, Catholic and mainline and evangelical Protestants, believe that Jesus and the prophets were talking in this parable about charitable acts by individuals rather than an obligation to create a just society. But the passion of Amos and Moses, the prophets, Jesus and Paul, was not that the wealthy and the powerful should increase their charitable giving. I don't think that was the case. As if pharaohs, kings, aristocrats, and emperors should donate more to humanitarian concerns. I think the prophetic voice of the Bible is about economic justice and fairness, that we should be working to make changes in our system as a whole, and not primarily about charity of individuals. And the alternative or necessary complement to this idea of individualism is the idea of the common good, that it helps to have a society where when you sit down to make rules, you're trying to have it benefit as big a number of people as you possibly can. And we really did well in our society when we had that as a focus. And many of you remember that, the idea of the common good, that every person should have their own home. Every person should be able to worship where they want, have a car, that we should try to make that available. That should be what every American aspires to, and we should help people get there. And the truth is, none of us are self-made, right? So we're just, it wasn't our design to be born in the wealthiest country in the world. All of us did not pick our parents. And even those of us who got to pick our parents didn't do a very good job sometimes. So often what's predicting how well you do is where you were born, the circumstances you were born. Did you have a loving family? We benefit from previous generations. I mean, we now, people who are born now have cell phones, which can do all kinds of things. We were not. We were born with TVs. Our parents were not. The cars are completely different. I mean, the people that came before us created the world we're living in, and we did very little, if you really look at it, to have done what we've managed to do in our lives. The common good should concern all of us, and not only for moral, but also for practical self-interested reasons, Countries that take seriously well-being of all are safer and healthier. They experience less crime and mental illness and lower infant mortality. Much is exceptional about our country, don't get me wrong. We're the world's oldest democracy. We pioneered human rights, even though it's taken us a couple of centuries to make them more or less universal. We've been a magnet for immigration from our beginning and continue to be. We are rich in natural resources and beauty. We're the most powerful country in the world and the wealthiest in terms of gross domestic product, even though not the wealthiest in per capita income. There is much to admire about our country, and there's nothing wrong with being grateful to live here. But as an ideology, American exceptionalism is about more than gratitude. It combines a number of convictions that many Americans share. For example, We are the greatest country in the world. This is part of familiar political rhetoric, because those who say it take it for granted that most of us will agree. Seldom is this question asked. Why? I mean, in what way are we the greatest country in the world? Is it the most powerful military? Well, that's true. Are we the most free? Well, there's scores of countries that are just as free as we are. Is this the land of the greatest opportunity? Well, it isn't anymore. We have less upward mobility than many countries. Is the land where we live, where the poor live, are they living as well as other people? And the answer is no. We're the most generous nation in the world. Well, that's not really true. Americans greatly overestimate how much they give in foreign aid. Rather than being the most generous, we number about 15th among the developed nations. We as a nation are basically good and thus could never do anything radically wrong. Well, this conviction leads to the belief that all the wars we fought were somehow all right decisions. Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan. There's a question there. The phrase, God bless America, as a prayer, there's nothing wrong with the phrase, but it has become part of an ideology in American exceptionalism, where God bless the United States of America is taken for granted as, not including everybody else. Bless us, period. Amos challenged and chastised the exceptionalism of his time. Many people, perhaps most in ancient Israel, believed that they had been chosen by God and were thus God's special people. To them, in the name of God, Amos said this, "Are you not like the Ethiopians to me, O people of Israel? Did I not bring Israel up from the land of Egypt, and the Philistines from Captor, and the Armenians from Kir?" That Ethiopians, Philistines, and Armenians were the same as Israel would have been an extraordinary claim for Amos's hearers, because they wanted things to be clean. Amos's indictment of Israel's exceptionalism is not exceptional in the Bible. The book of Jonah is a book about God's love for the people of Nineveh, the capital city of Assyria, perhaps the most brutal of ancient Israel's conquerors. So also is the teaching of Jesus to his contemporaries. He said that he said that non-Jews, like the people of Nineveh and the queen of the south, would be more favorably viewed by God than they would be. So I wonder, are we as Americans blessed? And I think in one sense we are. This is one of the best countries in the world to live in. Are we privileged, as if God has favored our country more than others? No, I don't believe that's true. And there's nothing in the Bible, I don't think, that I know of that would argue for that. The notion that we are God's favored nation is a manifestation of American self-centeredness and overconfidence, seeing ourselves as individuals and as a nation as the center of God's creation and concern. So hubris is all about puffing oneself up beyond appropriate size, whether as an individual or as a country. And I think we do well to heed Amos and focus on the needy and broken in our own country, doing the best we can to assure that every American has an equal opportunity to succeed in this country. And I think that's the main message, is if you're going to use the money you have, use it to bring up the poor and the needy rather than to load it in your bank account. Amos and much of the Bible supports social justice and fairness of opportunity for all. I think we need these days maybe just a little bit more of Amos. Thank you.